BPC-157 is a powerful healing peptide that's found in the gastric juices, and it stands for body protection complex. And what's so unique about this peptide is...
And getting into these peptides, we hear about the anti-inflammation, we hear about the tissue regeneration, we hear about the angiogenesis, the growth and branching out of new blood vessels. So what are the most popular healing peptides that we have? And talk about a little bit of their mechanisms of action and how do they actually work in the body?
Fasting, believe it or not, is extremely healing. This is our centerpiece for our lasting weight loss program, but fasting for 48 hours, say every single week, is really going to turn on some powerful cellular autophagy, internal healing processes, reducing your stress load if you can, reorganizing it, or implementing a stress management technique, adding some powerful adaptogenic herbs. And people don't realize the injury itself is a stressor. So one supplement that I always recommend to people if they are dealing with an injury is a...
I've been so excited to jump into this topic with you today because it seems like anyone who's tried to maintain a lifestyle of health has always been met with this double-edged sword. The more active you are, the more prone you are to injury. And if you get
Yeah.
hurt, treatments are so dramatic, right? And, 10, 12, 15 years ago, we had the stem cell boom. And rightly so, there was a lot of trepidation, there was a lot of fear, a lot of conflict. It was causing tumors. We were using embryonic cells. Then we did have the non-embryonic allograft stem cell, but by that point, there had been so much smearing and so much negative attention that it never really got a chance, if I could say it like that.
Yeah.
Um, and then lo and behold, peptides come out, and we hear about BPC, TB-500, a couple others that we'll talk about today, and it just seems like there's an entirely new universe and a new way to safely unlock some new aspects of health and try to avoid some of the more dramatic and invasive procedures. So starting with BPC, I know we covered peptides in general last time we met, but just as a brief overview, let's just go into what is a peptide.
Yeah, we'll do a quick recap. And if any of you listeners, check out the last podcast we did or my Peptide 101 video is great on our YouTube channel. But essentially, I always tell people to think about peptides like hormones and what they are. A hormone is released by a certain part of your body. They're produced in glands. The hormones are floating around the bloodstream, and they activate, they turn on various processes in the body on other tissues, other organs, other systems. It's a very systemic effect, right? And every hormone's different and there's different receptor sites. You can think of peptides for all intents and purposes, pretty much the same concept with their own nuanced differences. And I really love the way Dr. Seeds describes peptides as the language of the human body, the language of the human body. And there are 7 to 10,000 plus, and they're discovering more all the time, peptides that our cells actually release themselves, and which would make sense, right? You think about how complex the human body is. There's so many different things going on at any given moment. And how does communication exist within your body, right? Because you have trillions of cells, trillions, not billions, trillions. And there's communication going all the time. And one very prominent form of communication is the release of these various peptides. And I always talk about in your brain, the release of growth hormone releasing peptides from the hypothalamus over to the pituitary gland to tell the pituitary gland to dump its own growth hormone. So, the observation that we know as we age, we have lower growth hormone levels. We actually don't. It's in the pituitary gland, but we have a lower signal to release. And so that's why peptide therapy is so awesome, because we're just enhancing a signal. This is why peptide therapy is generally very safe. We don't have enough human data to say that. And that's why the FDA is doing what they're doing. And I have my own opinions about that. But technically, they're right. We don't have enough human data. But anecdotally, very strong evidence anecdotally suggests they're very safe. And we see that they're very powerful. And I think the safety has a lot to do with the fact that when you're injecting these, you are injecting the messenger that's already recognized by the body, as opposed to pharmacological agents, which are all foreign. And sort of jamming their signal, if that makes sense, like
Mhm.
forcing a signal to happen. And because they're powerful, they do that. But because they're foreign, the concept that some people believe is that's why there's a higher side effect profile, a lower toxic threshold, meaning the amount to take to hit a dangerous amount is much lower. I mean, you could take peptides and inject 1,000 times above
Mhm.
the efficacious dose, and they have studied this in with BPC-157 specifically, and they literally had to inject hundreds of thousands of times the clinical dose to actually produce any death in the animal. So yeah, very, very hard to achieve some sort of toxic threshold with peptides, and it makes sense why.
Right, right. And getting into these peptides, we hear about the one anti-inflammation. We hear about the tissue regeneration. We hear about the angiogenesis, the growth and branching out of new blood vessels. So, what are the most popular healing peptides that we have? And talk about a little bit of their mechanisms of action and how do they actually work in the body?
Yeah, I was, thinking before we even get into peptides, let's just talk about healing, because I think if we talk about
Mm,
healing first, we can then appreciate what the peptides do, and then appreciate why our clinic is so motivated to focus on other lifestyle interventions to support the peptides. So when we get an
mm,
injury, right? Let's say we get tendonitis. Maybe I'm picking that because I had that going on here not too long ago, and it was really starting to bother me. Medial epicondylitis. So the middle side of my arm, that elbow, that medial part of that elbow, was starting to get painful. It just kept getting worse and prevented me. Actually, started interfering with my workouts. Right. So that condition, we know medial epicondyle, right? That's what we call the little portion of the bone right there. Itis, inflammation. So there's
mm,
inflammation of that tendinous insertion onto that bone. Okay. Now, medial epicondylitis, lateral epicondylitis, these are season-ending injuries sometimes for athletes, and summer-ending situations for some people because it can get so bad, and it's
mhm,
progressive because think about every time you move your wrist, you move your hand, you are pulling and on those on that ligament, so on that tendinous junction. So it's aggravated, and depending on how bad it is, it could be a really problematic situation. So the you think about an injury like that, right? So the inflammation is the sort of first thing that goes on with an injury, right? Now
mhm,
we talk about injuries themselves; they could be an acute injury. So I was working out and I tore something, right? I was playing football, I was playing sports, and I tore something. Or it could be, so it's more of a acute thing, or it could be a chronic injury, right? That's sort of like the repetitive aggravation over time. But and there's going to be definitely differences between both of these injuries, but they both end up with inflammation, aggravation, irritation at the injury site, right? And
mhm,
your body is trying to heal. The moment injury starts, your body's trying to heal with an initial inflammatory reaction, a local inflammatory reaction, which is in of itself a bit of a stressor to the body because now we're allocating resources towards healing that
mhm,
injury, which is why we notice people sometimes get more sick when they're injured because now we have some of our energy being diverted towards healing that local area, especially when we look at the severity of some injuries or how big they are. But it all starts with inflammation, right? Now, the second thing is, well, what is going on with that injury in that healing process? For example, and this is why medial and lateral epicondylitis are a big deal because we can't get away from using that, right? Because we need to use our hand every day.
mhm,
And so you have continual stressors, continual trauma to an area. So it never really gets a chance to actually heal. It needs that complete rest. But we know how complete rest would be complete isolation because now you're going to have severe atrophy to the muscle. And we know that's not ideal either. So we have a lot of variables, a lot of things going on. And the it all starts with that inflammation standpoint. Then after that, the body starts to then release growth factors. It releases some stem cell proliferation. There's some migration of these microproteins, these microRNAs, these growth factors, and then eventually stem cells. And so when we get to that phase, that's where real healing starts. But is it able to accomplish the end result, which is you're back into action and you feel 100% great? It certainly happens with much more ease the younger we are, right? But
Hmm.
the older we get, and it's not an age thing, but the older we get, the less unhealthy, right, our bodies tend to get. The more inflamed, the more stressed, the more micronutrient deficient, right? And the more that we have of these other things going on, the less likely we are to accomplish full recovery. And then the more susceptible we are to more injury in the future. Okay. Now, all of that is sort of its own kind of pre-existing condition, if you will. But then you also have to consider the actual structure itself, and the muscular system, and the skeletal system, and your alignment, and muscular imbalances and tightnesses, which is kind of a whole other topic for another time. So I bring that up so that we can then kind of understand. Okay, so that's a little bit of what the process looks like. Now we talk peptides. Okay, so BPC-157, tried and true, and it's unfortunate that that's now been banned, but BPC-157 is a powerful healing peptide that's found in the gastric juices, and it stands for body protection complex. And what's so unique about this peptide is, even though it is a gastric peptide, promotes healing in the gastric juice, in the gastric system, and the digestive system, reduces inflammation, heals those tight gap junctions within the intestinal walls. But then it also has a systemic effect. So what we know anecdotally, injection systemically, somehow the peptide knows to migrate, again, signaling, right? There's some sort of signaling that causes an effect at an injury site. And
Hmm.
what we see is angiogenesis. We see increase of blood flow. We see an increase in growth factor delivery. We see some cell migration. TB-500 is better at cell migration, but stem cell proliferation. So a lot of the things that we already innately have, right? It's not turning on anything new.
Hmm.
It's just activating it better. It's causing a stronger effect. And there is nothing, I mean, I put peptides up into the category of, like stem cell therapy, for example,
Hmm.
a powerful therapy that, despite all other variables, we can have a powerful effect, right? So that's what's going on with BPC-157, and those are the various things that it's triggering.
Okay. Well, let me ask you. My stepmom, she's a provider down in Honolulu, Hawaii, and she's always been a cardio monster, right? At a point, I thought she was going to start doing ultra marathons. And she understands bone density and mobility and the importance of the final decade. And she's really been, especially the last maybe decade, getting into the weight training. She's 30 years older than me, and literally looks like she could be my age. I mean, you saw the X-ray and how great her bones were. So anyway, she had a lateral dislocation of her elbow, tore two tendons, broke her wrist. I'm not sure if it was the carpal and part of the metacarpal. Not positive, but I know there's some breakage in there, and she messed up her shoulder. Okay. What would a healing peptide like this do for her?
Yeah, I mean, the starting point is it's going to reduce inflammation quicker, right?
Mhm.
So inflammation, like we said before, is that first reaction. Well, you can't really get into some aggressive healing when you have too much inflammation, but you do need that inflammation to have its initial reaction to the local trauma, to the
Mhm.
trauma that's taken place. But then your body then locally reduces the inflammation to a certain extent to then trigger further healing processes. So when you have a body that's already sort of has that chronic inflammation issue, which chronic inflammation is at this point understood as a starting piece, like just like mitochondrial dysfunction, a starting piece to almost all disease pathology.
Right.
We find it in every day. I mean, you don't find a disease process without excessive inflammation systemically to a certain
And
extent.
we're talking inflammation from whether it be dietary intake, an autoimmune, chronic injury, just really anything, right?
Yeah, these are all. It's very very complex, but essentially, you besides local inflammation in reaction to, say, an immune system insult or a tendinous injury, we have this sort of underlying chronic inflammation, which you could think of it for all, like you said, like a bucket, so to speak, and all these different things are contributing to it, right? And it's, what makes inflammation so freaking difficult is you do have some objective tests that do measure certain pockets of inflammation, if you will, like C-reactive protein and this erythrocyte sedimentation rate. But a negative on those tests, like a very low, just means, okay, well, we don't potentially see inflammation. You can still have it. So, while I still recommend getting those tests done, I think we talked about that in one of our other episodes, but it's very tricky. Inflammation, we'll just leave it at that. Inflammation is very, very tricky. Presence of symptoms is probably more diagnostic of some potential systemic inflammations. If one feels 100% great in all systems, they probably have a good, healthy amount of inflammation. They probably don't have systemic inflammation. So it's the presence of symptoms. But getting back to your stepmom and that injury, BPC-157 and the other ones that we're going to talk about, they're going to cause a much more rapid decrease in inflammation, so that the next phase of healing can take place, which will be the angiogenesis, the development of new blood vessels, the migratory effect to bring over these stem cells to shuttle more growth factors and microRNAs for tissue rebuilding, so that we can deliver the amino acids into the tissues and rebuild that tissue. So in summary, speed the process up dramatically, right?
Right, right. And what should you be doing? Well, man, I have a couple questions here. So tell me which one you want to answer first. One is more of the peripherals. What can you do to speed this all up, to enhance it, and to boost it? And the other question is, how do I know if I'm in the pool of potential participants for this peptide? Is this for those already with injury? Is this for those with just chronic ailments that aren't that bad? If I've been a lifetime athlete, maybe I don't have anything diagnosed, I don't have anything acute, but man, I have aches and pains, right? And if anything, I want to reverse damage that's been done thus far, right?
Right.
So sorry for the twofold answer. I didn't want to forget either one of them.
Yeah, no, I think what we should
Question.
do, because I have a lot to say about, because we prescribe peptides and we've been doing this for as long as I can remember. Right when hormone therapy 10 years ago, when we started that, we started doing the few peptides that were available back then with the whole tailor-made pharmacy, which really brought this to the country. So we'll go through all the peptides. And then let's go through, who's it good for, what's it for, and then I really want to spend a good chunk of time talking about enhancing peptide, right? Like lifestyle, because there's so much there. So TB-500. So TB-500 is the next one, and TB-500 is a fragment of thymosin beta-4, right? So thymosin beta-4 is an interesting peptide. It is found in the thymus gland. It plays some various roles with our immune system and our immune regulatory system, but it's a very powerful healing peptide. So TB-500, even though it's a fragment, it's still it is the healing portion of that entire compound, that entire peptide. So TB-500 does a lot of what BPC-157 does, but if we're talking injury, right? If we're talking, I got to heal through something, TB-500 is sort of the heavy hitter, because you can really, and it's a little more pricey, but you can heavy hit that dose. And the one piece, so in addition to angiogenesis, in addition to blood flow improvement, in addition to delivery of nutrients and growth factors and all that, what BPC does, TB-500 has a really strong cell migration component, which is nice, because that is one necessary variable, is the ability to migrate what you need closer to the damaged tissues, to the damaged cells, to enhance healing. So
Would that be are they being drawn in by cytokines?
I think cytokines definitely play a role. Cytokines are signaling inflammatory molecules, and so there's no real data that because remember, we don't have the level of human data that we should have for something this safe and this powerful, and that's a whole other conversation right there. So But from the data that we do have and a lot of animal studies, we know TB-500 is powerful. And anecdotally, I've always seen that to be the powerhouse in terms of really looking to get through injuries. And, what's awesome is the systemic effect, the systemic effect. So we're not just targeting the local injury, but we can expect some improvement all around the body. So TB-500 is definitely number 2 on my list. So I look at BPC-157 as a base. And I do think it's worth talking about KPV as a base because, access to BPC right now is a little bit more challenging. And so with KPV, we're talking KPV is a 3 amino acid peptide. Specifically, where KPV shines is gut healing. So BPC-157 does gut healing and some systemic healing, but KPV is a gut healing peptide only. I look at that as a base because I think the majority of the population has gut issues. The majority of the population doesn't have a nice, squeaky clean digestive system, and so really the gut is the center of potentially the center of a lot of pro-inflammatory things that are going on in the body, a lot of dysregulation down there, and so I think the general public would improve dramatically by throwing in some powerful gut healing peptides as a base. And cost wise, I think there's a high ROI with KPV. You can do it with BPC if you have access to BPC, but you can do it as a base, and then you can add that TB-500 to really get that powerful systemic healing effect for the rest of the body.
Good. And can you be more specific about the gut health? Because I feel as though a lot of people, when they hear about healing peptides, they're more thinking of structural and tissue healing. But there's a lot of people out there, as you know, that are struggling with SIBO or GERD or Hashis, and even some of the autoimmunes, like I've heard of lupus being helped from this. And talk about the correlation between healing the gut and some autoimmunes and just in general, some of those nasty gut issues specifically that you believe could be assisted.
Yeah, and the gut is just. I mean, I'm doing a 4-episode series with Dr. Dan the Wizard, and we just finished our first, where I'm interviewing him. So, I mean, the gut is just insanely vital and integral. And I mention it because of the main reason that the farther we deviate from a healthy gut, the greater the degree of production of systemic inflammation, which is going to interfere with healing. The greater the stress on the body, the greater the cortisol secretion and inhibition of healing. And so, and I really do believe the majority of the public, because of the standard American diet that we're eating, in a lower healing, a lower potential for healing state, higher amount of gut inflammation. So, in essence, the gut, when we say the gut, we're referring to the entire digestive system, mouth to anus, but it is so much more complex with this symbiotic relationship that we and all animals have with microorganisms. It's crazy. We have, remember when I mentioned we have trillions of cells in the body. We actually have more bacterial cells in our body, in our gut specifically, and then we have tons of bacteria all over our skin. They're everywhere. It's like, so what is a human? It's kind of crazy when you start getting a little less of that. Are we bacteria? Are the bacteria running us? I mean, who knows, right? But the bacteria essentially vital for our function because we get so much essential nutrients from bacteria. And they end up affecting us in so many ways that we couldn't even get into, but our immune system, our cognition, our ability to digest foods, our fermentation and production of short chain fatty acids, it's just all performed by these bacteria, which are looking to get taken care of by us. And then in return, they take care of us, which is pretty amazing. So, you want to respect your gut. And if you are suffering, especially if you notice that you're an individual who suffers with recurring injuries, if you're an individual who tends to get injured more easily and you seem to take longer to heal, then I would bet that there's some gut issues going on in the background. And so I think it's worth it's worth taking a look into that and taking a deep dive. And I think me and you should definitely do a more comprehensive gut episode after I finish my series with Dr. Dan, because I'm learning
Mhm.
so much. That guy's a genius. Um, but yeah, I think incorporating some gut healing is a good idea. Which when we talk about the overall stuff that I like to recommend with our patients, a lot of what we do there to optimize peptides includes gut healing for sure. So
A patient asked me this yesterday, and I started laughing when he did. And I was on the phone. William, he was laughing too. He chuckled because he knows I hear it a lot. And I'd love to know your thoughts on a couple of things. One is just the delivery. Hearing that certain healing peptides can be better for certain conditions based off the delivery type, specifically more talking about gut versus other tissues. And the other piece being there is a hot debate in the healing peptide community currently about the importance of doing a localized injection or on the other side, the fact that it doesn't matter at all because even a subcutaneous injection is going to give you systemic effects. So you got people who, they have a messed up humeral head or a labrum or bicep tendon, and they swear that in order to get better results, you got to inject right next to the shoulder. Then there are doctors who say, no, 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 belly's fine. So what are your thoughts there?
I wanted to interrupt for a quick minute. I have a free peptide guide. So everything you're learning today, we put it down, the protocols and exactly what you need to know. You can access that by clicking the link at the beginning of my description of the video. Now back to the show.
yeah, it's purely anecdotal, but there seems to be this strong idea that injecting closer to the injury may improve results. Because of that, I've always told patients if you're comfortable with injecting closer to the injury, you have nothing to lose.
Mm-hmm.
But there's just some areas that you can't get to, like with the medial epicondylitis, right? For
Mm-hmm.
men, for example, there's just no fat around there to inject into. And you can inject into the muscle, but then that hurts a little bit more so I think it just depends, right? If you happen to have an injury around the butt, great, inject in the butt. I mean, it's such an easy place because there's a lot of fat there, right? Even
Right.
in a leaner man. So I think if you can get to look closer to the injury, go for it. You have nothing to lose. I would still rotate your injection sites because now we're talking about daily injection. So rotation
Mm-hmm.
is key. Another big obstacle people run into is do not reuse the same reconstitution needle. That is such a biggie. The big needle that all you do is draw into your bacteriostatic water. I've seen patients, because it's bacteriostatic water, so why can't I use the big needle? But for whatever reason, even that bacteriostatic water doesn't necessarily, it's not a guarantee to prevent microorganism development. So those reconstitution needles should be one-time use and discarded. And just to ensure that there's no introduction of microorganisms. But yeah.
Yeah, and because people don't always listen to your podcast, to clarify, you said bacterioacidic to actually point out the fact that this bacteriostatic water is high acidity so that it can kill bacteria off, which is necessary for a peptide that you're consistently injecting into, right?
Yeah, we did a whole deep dive on bacteriostatic versus bacteriostatic. So no, I'm glad you brought that up.
Thank you.
Um,
Now, bread and butter piece here, though. Safety, efficacy, human trials and studies, right? I don't need to get into the conversation about the powers that be and the eternal tug of war between integrated health and big pharma. But for the information that is out there, what have we seen, or what can you observe with the safety and with the research and the applications of this peptide or of these peptides?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a ton of animal studies. It looks really promising. Just very limited human data. And so because of that, generally speaking in science with less human data, you should tread with caution. Okay. Um, but this is such a unique situation where we've never had lack of human data, yet such an insanely large off-label use, and it's just never happened before. So this is one of those situations where we can't be scientific, and we almost have to use our common sense here for a second.
Mm.
Most people would agree. We know just that there's probably millions of people using peptides, whether they're getting it from legit state regulated compounding pharmacies with a board certified physician, or they're unfortunately getting it through scrupulous sources, online research companies, which you should stay the heck away from. Just many issues. I talked about that in the past, but we know it's probably upwards towards the millions, and we're just not seeing reports to any degree. I still haven't seen any. I'm waiting to see it, and so I I know to my core how safe they are, but technically speaking, we might see that, yeah, there's this slight risk in the future, and so we should continue to research it and continue to study it. Safety is important, but again, everything needs to come down to a cost benefit, and I think that it is a struggle and frustrating to see that they're being suppressed the way they are. So
Yeah. So if you were to give me Dr. Jones's roadmap to success on peptides, right? So I need to select what I'm doing with the combination of BPC, TP5, and KPV. So how do I do that? Which ones are going to be effective, and how do I know what to use which for? And everything that is going to overlay with this that is going to lead to heightened success, whether that be at home fitness, nutrition, supplementation, soft tissue work, chiropractic, right? Working with the local practitioner. Anyone who's listening to this cares about their health, cares about their healing. This is an expensive world. Frugality has to go up because, to an extent, families are forced to pinch pennies a little bit more. So things need to be effective, right? And I do hear a lot that people kind of have to throw stuff around and see what sticks, because there is either, from what I see, a lack of information, or there are just so many competing ideas that people have no idea which direction to turn to, right? So there definitely
yeah,
is some need for some coaching and some route setting here. So let's go to
yeah.
that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a doctor of chiropractic, right, I'm all too familiar. The
Mhm.
study of body works is just massive, and there's no cohesion. But we know there's something there for sure, right? Like nobody in their right mind would just sit there and do nothing, and they would just. I mean, some people do, I guess, out of fear and concern, but or they're unfortunately listen to their primary care and just take ibuprofen and non-steroidal anti-inflammatories and wait, which is the worst. I mean, anyways, we get into all that, but so let's look at the protocols, the dosing for a second. So BPC-157, I like a 500 microgram injection once a day. Could go up to 750 or even a gram per day. That's definitely on the heavier side. I think 500 micrograms is a solid cycle. And then TB-500 can be 500 micrograms up to 2,000 micrograms or 2 milligrams per day. So you want the most potent Wolverine-like healing, then you want 2 grams of TB-500 and 500 micrograms of BPC. Now you can split that up twice a day, right? So you can do 250 BPC and 1,000 of the TB-500, and you can do that twice a day, right? You can stack with this some growth hormone, and we're going to get into growth hormone. I know we have another episode on I think on Friday, right? We're going to talk about growth hormone, but stacking growth hormone with this is nice because we know growth hormone has its own roles that it does with healing, and growth hormone has a synergistic effect with BPC-157. So getting in some growth hormone peptides like Samorelin, 500 micrograms twice a day is great. 5 days on, 2 days off, or Tesamorelin, 1 milligram once a day. 5 days on, or 5 to 6 days on, 1 day off. So this is a good base. KPV would be about 500 micrograms once a day. That's an oral pill. That's just a pill. You consume that, and it affects the gut. But I think this is a solid cycle. 3 to 4 months on, 1 month off. 3 to 4 months on, 1 month off. BPC-157 is definitely a peptide that you could take more regularly if you have access to it. But the TB-500 is definitely more of that heavy hitter. Use it when you're really trying to get through those heavy injuries. Take a little bit more time off. I like the idea of like a 3-to-1, 4-to-1 ratio for peptides like the growth hormone peptides and the BPC-157 and TB-500. If if you do a 3 to 4 month cycle, maybe get like 2 months off and then hit it again if you still have that injury.
And can you explain why virtually all peptides require a time off cycle?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's no data that says we need it, but it's kind of a common sense thing. We know tolerance develops, we know resistance develops to anything excessively over time, and so sort of just an understanding of mechanisms tells us. And if you understand those mechanisms, it does become common sense that to prevent the degradation, the downregulation of those receptors, we want to give them a break. And anecdotally, we definitely see reports of decreased effectiveness with continual use. So,
And when are you going to change your therapy type, specifically with the healing peptide, going between an injectable version that's lyophilized versus oral or a troche or a sublingual?
well, BPC-157 is the only one that's in both forms, and we know that the oral BPC is better for gut healing, and we know that the injection is better for musculoskeletal. TB-500 is always going to be injectable. The growth hormone peptides are always going to be injectable. KPV is oral. I haven't seen it in injectable, and since it's primarily just a gut healer, it makes sense to keep it oral. Most peptides are in the category of injection. So,
okay. Now that brings us to the peripherals, right? All the lifestyle supplements, nutrition, soft tissue work. This stuff is going to yield pretty damn miraculous results as a standalone, take this and that's it. We know that because we've seen it. But we also know that if you do your own work, you can dramatically bolster the type of success that you're going to have. I mean, assisting in the anti-inflammation, assisting in the tissue rebuild, doing your own physical therapy and soft tissue work and relaxing the body, doing things to not restrict your blood flow, right? I mean, if we know you want additional blood flow, you want vasodilation, maybe take a break from the cigarettes here and there,
right.
right?
Yeah.
So what should someone be doing to maximize all this?
There's so much. So we'll start with the more obvious category, like addressing the musculoskeletal system directly, and we'll kind of work our way up. So at home therapies, I mean, there's so many there, right? Foam rolling, lacrosse ball rolling, muscle adhesions. That is its own giant pool of ideas and concepts. And, I think the one that we can agree on, most people, is that smashing the muscles when they're tight and they're lumpy produce some sort of benefit, some sort of improvement. No one's arguing that. And it's free. I mean, you buy a foam roller for $10, fit $20 for a good one. My favorite one is the one that has more of a ridged edge. So it's like $30 for a good one. So there's sort of two things happening here. You have the adhesions in the muscle itself, and then you also have the fascia. And the fascia is like this clear sticky tissue that surrounds the muscles. And in a healthy situation, the muscles need to be able to move freely and independently of the fascia, but the fascia begins to adhese itself to the muscles. And so foam rolling is a good way to break up those fascial adhesions as well as those muscular adhesions. It promotes blood flow to the area right after you do it. And again, it's cheap, it's free. It's really hard to hurt yourself with foam rolling. It's really hard to make it worse, right? And we're talking a couple minutes per area, right? So I think if you're going to be investing thousands of dollars in a peptide cycle, you're stupid to not incorporate some foam roll. And then
You essentially have to have an acute injury in order to foam roll to make something worse. I mean, in a decade, I probably saw it happen twice. Yeah, it's doing it on your own unless you're being dumb about it is very simple.
Yeah, like if somebody, if you got hit in the calf with a 100-mile-per-hour baseball, I wouldn't go foam roll that calf. I mean, so we're definitely talking about like you said, not on an acute injury, but the muscles around it, I think would do great. So the lacrosse ball is a way to kind of hit the shoulders, the back, for the same concept, just trying to get into those tighter areas that the big foam roller can't get. And again, there's so many thoughts. There's so many ideas of how to approach it. Foam roll everything, foam roll around the injury. you're going to have to play and experiment with it. And when we talk about physical therapists or chiro in a second, they might be able to be the better one to assess you and give you specific foam rolling. But I think foam roll lacrosse is a good starting point. Then moving up the chain, okay, who are the two professionals that know this space better than anybody else? Physical therapy, chiropractic. What's the difference? Physical therapists focus on the musculoskeletal system with training in the spine too as well. And then you have chiros that focus on the spinal column with training on the appendicular system, the external skeletal system outside the spine. As I'm a doctor of chiropractic myself, so I'm probably a little impartial, but we have an entire board examination on PT as well. And then, when we get out there, chiros get out into practice. There's obviously more PTs that are focusing on musculoskeletal, and there's more chiros focusing on the skeletal and the spinal alignment, but you have plenty of chiros that do good on the PT side. So you're going to have to play around with this. And then there's so many different ideas of physical therapy. There's so many different philosophies of chiro. And so, it's tough. It's tough. But if you, and we're talking $75 on average per visit, if you don't have insurance coverage, I think that if you are on a budget, starting with either, both maybe, or either finding one that has some knowledge of the injury, they can do a good assessment, they can give you a good diagnosis, and they can make recommendations. Okay, great. So I can see what's going on here. Let's look at some foam rolling specifically on this particular area, right? So for example, in my situation of the medial epicondylitis, upon exam, even myself, like it was just, I still go to a PT myself, as much knowledge as I have, to get that second opinion. And they identified some really inhibited internal rotation on my right arm, right? And so the internal rotation on my right shoulder is very limited. So therefore, a lot of my lifting movements are tugging and pulling more on that epicondyle, right? And so what have I been focusing on, and why is it better now? Focusing on improving that shoulder internal rotation. And so it really helped getting that second opinion. And then a lot of that stuff I was able to do at home on my own. Sometimes it's not a money issue. It's a time issue to get out there and see the chiro, to see the PT. So again, this isn't a super structured, scientifically backed approach. This is a little bit of, like you said, here's a pool of things. Let's throw darts. Let's see what lands. If you don't have a good experience with one PT, try another one. Don't have a good experience with one chiro, try another one. And you can totally do both. You can have the PT focusing on the muscular approach. And I've seen, and I can account for thousands, if not millions, I think thousands, millions of miracles for chiropractic all the time. Getting that spinal column in alignment can have miraculous healing, both in internal and external, right? That's why chiropractic is growing and as popular as it is. So, don't feel like, if it's my elbow, it needs to be just a PT only thing. I mean, I haven't shared this story myself too much, but what led me down the path of becoming a doctor of chiropractic was my wrist injury, and I had a fracture to my wrist, and I somehow ended up in a chiropractic office. Probably should have seen a PT at that time, but I just actually no, I did. I saw a couple PTs and orthopedic surgeons who couldn't figure it out, and this particular chiro did this very unique technique, and I was back to lifting as a 19-year-old. It was life changing for me, and that's what led me down that path. And I'm very, very grateful because it got me the exposure to holistic medicine and healthcare as a whole. But very awesome things that can happen, and we're talking not that much of a financial investment, a little bit of a time investment. But again, if you're looking at peptides, it would be silly to not get this piece of it, right? So you got the at-home therapy, right? You got the PT and or chiro to help you put it all together, get a solid regimen, and then we start getting into, okay, now outside of the musculoskeletal system itself, what are the basic tenets that are going to dramatically improve, especially if there's a big issue there, right? So your inflammation levels, right? And are you chronically inflamed or not? Are you metabolically of poor health or not, right? So this falls into multiple categories, but how's your diet, right? How's their supplement regimen? Both looking at your diet and opting more for an anti-inflammatory diet, reducing consumption of processed foods. We know it's going to lower inflammation levels. Focusing on a good supplement regimen, which hopefully you're already on a good supplement regimen, but then the tweaks you can do when you are injured the number one nutrient. If you're already on a good supplement regimen, which, we will save that for a whole nother podcast, but essentially magnesium, vitamin D, essential fatty acids, some sort of broad spectrum multivitamin, I think that's the base for everybody. Curcumin and resveratrol could be a base for you if you have an autoimmune disease, but really mega dosing your curcumin. This is a sort of a thing that a lot of people don't know. Curcumin is very safe. Curcumin is the active ingredient in turmeric. You can start to, whether you're on it or not, you can start increasing your dose of curcumin, like one pill every couple days, depending on the dose. Doesn't really matter what the dose is. One pill is the only way you can titrate it up. Up it by one pill a day, maybe twice a week, and keep doing that until you notice your stools get a little softer, and then back up the dose, and that might be really high. But you should notice a decrease in pain if you had pain going on. And what this sort of does is it's like a hose. It's like taking your garden hose and upgrading it to a fire hose, firefighter's hose, in terms of dampening the inflammation. So you can do that. You could do that. That's a nice little hack there. A lot of people don't know about. You could do that for 3 months, and really decrease that inflammation. And then we talk about supplements. We talked about decreasing your processed food consumption. Fasting, believe it or not, is extremely healing, right? So this is our centerpiece for our lasting weight loss program, but fasting for 48 hours, say every single week, is really going to turn on some powerful cellular autophagy, internal healing processes. So even if you are somebody who doesn't fast much at all, let's just use an extreme example. Let's say you're on the lighter side and you're trying to gain weight, right? Well, you ain't going to gain weight if you can't lift weights, right? So adding some deep fasting could be what gets you to the next step, even if you do lose some weight. But I promise you, a lot of that weight you're going to lose is going to include some muscle mass too as well. Just compensate for fasting. And this is very few small populations, so I'm not going to harp on this, but most of us would benefit from extra fasting. But for you are listening to this and you are a hard gainer, just consume additional calories outside that fast. But that fast is a free way to powerfully enhance your internal healing. And then outside of that, I mean, I can't harp this enough. I'm actually filming a hour-long sleep optimization video this Thursday. I'm super excited for that because, I mean, there was a freaking 6-episode series from Dr. Huberman that just came out, 2 to 3 hours each episode. I mean, who has 12 to 18 hours to watch that whole series? I mean, I did because this is my job to do it for everybody. And so I'm going to take that and other strategies they didn't talk about and put it together into 1 hour. I think it's going to be the most comprehensive sleep optimization video you're going to find, period. But sleep optimization, I mean, that's the base for healing, for optimal health. I actually would argue that, because I never talk about sleep as the number one pillar for optimal health, but when you look at all the lifestyle strategies, I would argue that sleep optimization actually gives you the best ROI. What do I mean by that, right? Like return on investment. It's not the first that I would say if you gave me a random population of 100 people, what's the one thing that's going to help them the most? I don't think sleep would be the first thing I would choose, because I don't think the majority of that group would be sleep deficient. I think there'd be other issues that I could focus on that you're going to find a larger percentage of the population dealing with. But if you asked me what improvement is the 100 people most likely to stick to from a general perspective, there's not a lot of work to do with sleep optimization. It's just an understanding, which I'm going to break it all down for people in the video. It's a lot of tweaks to your environment. Once you make the tweak, it's just there, versus changing your diet. That's an ongoing thing, and yeah, it becomes easier to eat healthier, but an Oreo cheesecake never stops looking delicious to me. I always have to implement some effort in there. Exercise, I mean, I love lifting weights, but it's still a thing I got to go do, right? So there's which it's the ROI is worth it, and I do that. But with sleep, though, once I make those changes to my environment, it's not taking up more time. So that's what's so interesting about sleep optimization. There's an upfront investment with a lifetime of dividends that it pays. So
There's
I think
a second layer to that. There really is. Everything we talked about today, all of these peptides, they don't mean anything without action. They don't mean anything if you don't take them. You just talked about going to the gym. You can have all of the knowledge in the world. You can listen to 20 of Dr. Joseph's podcasts, but if you don't get your butt through those doors in the gym, nothing's going to change. What do we know about sleep? A lack of it gives you no control over limbic friction. A lot of sleep gives you full control over limbic friction. When you don't want to do something, your ability to tell yourself to do that thing is regulated by how much sleep you got the night before. So if you want to take action on your goals, if you want to get to the gym 3-4 days a week, if you want to, instead of reaching for the dessert, cook some healthy food, get some sleep, and all of those decisions become easier because now you're not fighting with yourself between what you really just want to do because it's easy and what you know you should do. And no one brings that up. Nobody really talks about the fact that you have more control over your actual life when you sleep better.
No. 100%, 100%. And then the last category I would say is stress management. Everything else can be dialed in and perfect, but if you're in a chronic stress situation with your body, if cortisol levels are peaking in times when they shouldn't be, because you do want a nice strong cortisol pulse in the morning, then you won't heal. You just won't. So reducing your stress load if you can, reorganizing it, or implementing a stress management technique, adding some powerful adaptogenic herbs. So and people don't realize the injury itself is a stressor, right? So one supplement that I always recommend to people if they are dealing with an injury is adaptogenic herbs, because even if you're like, I don't have stress in my life, that injury is a stress, both physically to your body and mentally, because now you have this thing that you're dealing with too as well. Even if you have a really positive attitude, which is great because having a positive attitude would make it less stressful, right? Don't stress about your injury. You ever heard that expression? Don't stress about your stress because you make it worse. But to a certain extent, you naturally will, especially if it's keeping you from doing the things you love, because the things that you love probably in themselves were a stress reduction technique. I know not being able to play volleyball for a year and a half was so stressful to me. And it's so crazy right now. I was just thinking about this. I can play full right now. I can go out there and smash, and I'm so happy. Yet I haven't been playing because we're so busy with everything that we're doing right now, launching the new YouTube page. But I don't feel stressed because I know I could play. So much different than when I couldn't play, and I was still busy, but I couldn't play because of the injury. Me making the choice, knowing that I can because I'm choosing to be more to allocate my time into something that's obviously more important for me right now, doesn't stress me out, which is really awesome. And I'm still going to I'm going to make time for fun. I'm going to be playing this summer. But anyways, yeah, I think we put it all together. Just letting you guys know we do offer peptides, guys. So we'll link to the show notes, but you guys absolutely, especially with summer around the corner, if you're dealing with something, if it's preventing you from an injury, you definitely want to check it out and reach out to us, and we got you covered for sure.
Yeah, man. Can't wait to talk to you about the growth hormone secretagogues on Friday. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's going to be a banger for sure. It was awesome, man.
Talk to you then.
All right. Bye-bye.
If you guys found this informative, then you're going to want to click this video right there. It's a continued explanation of what you learned today, guys. Knowledge is power, so let's keep this going. We'll see you later.